All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. Quickly coming on the end of the school year, today has been a really busy day here with live lessons. This is our third live lesson of the day. By the time we turn things off for this later this evening, we'll have had 5 live events, connecting in different cool places around the world, looking at Everest, live at the river in Zambia, the Kabumpo River. Later tonight, a Darwin 200 event for classrooms in Australia, New Zealand region. So it is a busy day as always. If you want to see what's coming up between now and the end of the school year, you can head to our website, exploringbytheseat.com. You'll find everything we have coming up this week and then into next week. Tomorrow, we've got some pretty cool action. We're going to go live on board Canada's only research icebreaker. They're gearing up for a big mission in the Arctic. So we're going to catch them in port in Quebec and get a chance to see this amazing ocean research vessel, take a tour, and learn about some of the work and the research they have coming up. Today, though, we are hanging out for a second time with our speaker, Alex Harz. He's a creator, host, and he was the camera operator on the Quest series, this time around Everest. So not only is it pretty impressive to climb Mount Everest, not a lot of people have done it. It's challenging, it's expensive, the weather and things are dangerous, but to bring along camera gear and to collect a story to share with, well, basically the whole world, everybody who can't get out to that place, it's pretty darn cool. And so Alex was kind enough to open up that VR video to classrooms. We had over 60, probably between 60 and 70 classrooms take us up on that invitation to watch the video and then tune into one of these 2 live events to have a chance to see behind the scenes and ask Alex some questions. In fact, Alex shared with me a little preview of the 2D documentary that we're going to play right now to kind of warm classrooms up and give them a chance to see what that looks like. Then we'll get Alex in here with us and we'll follow him up the mountain on a little visual tour. So here we go.
Hey, nowhere else in the world would we climb an ice fall like this. Nowhere. You'd be nutter.
Number one thing is you have to be very mentally prepared for it.
Welcome to Nepal.
Thank you so much.
Climb the Mount Everest, right?
That's where I'm going.
The Sherpas, the goddess of this sacred mountain.
This monastery was built in the 16th century. At that time, this monastery was already destroyed once by the avalanche.
I've never been to this country before. I've never been to the Khumbu Valley. I've never been to Mount Everest. It's not about this mountain. It's about you guys.
Becoming mountain guide, it's not easy.
I want to say, all girls, you should come and you can follow your dream.
To camp 2, it looks okay, and after that, I'll let you know.
What piece of advice would you give someone?
If you want to climb the mountain and go back to your home, just prepare for it before you come here.
Be scared and be intimidated and be humble.
There's a lot of crevasse, open crevasse.
I came to Nepal on a quest to explore this captivating country and to honor a childhood promise. But I leave with so much more.
All right. Pretty darn cool. And we're pretty lucky to have Alex waiting backstage, creator, host, camera operator. Let's get him in here live with us right now. Hey, Alex, long time no see.
How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, good to have you in here with us today. And, you know, I've said this a few times, but can't say it enough. Thanks so much for giving classrooms this opportunity, opening up the video and letting them take that VR trip.
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's my pleasure, my honor. You know, that's part of the whole doctrine of the Quest is to take people on educational thrill rides around the world to see some of these amazing places that they may not be able to go to themselves. So to be able to share that with the classrooms and the students around the world is, like I said, my honor.
All right. Well, before we dive into some photos, little video clips that are going to take us behind the scenes, tell us a little bit about the inspiration for climbing Everest.
Yeah, the inspiration for climbing Everest goes back a ways to when I was 14 years old. I was a soccer player, during my youth, and I spent every day pretty much playing soccer and coming home from a practice. Living in Omaha, Nebraska at that point in time, I was sitting in my couch after a soccer practice and I saw something on TV about Mount Everest. And I told myself that day that someday I would climb that mountain. Well, going through high school and graduating, in high school at the Central High School in Omaha, Nebraska, and spending a year in the University of Nebraska in Omaha. I then moved out to Colorado. I ended up graduating from the University of Colorado, and I had nothing in my mind that made me think about mountaineering. I wasn't into climbing. I wasn't much into the big mountain stuff at all. Wasn't even a great interest at that time until one day I was sitting randomly on my couch in Denver, Colorado, watching some random daytime television, and for no apparent reason, that recollection, that memory of me promising myself when I was 14 years old that one day I would climb Mount Everest popped back in my head. And the next day I started to honor that commitment because I realized if I couldn't keep a promise to myself, how can I ultimately guarantee my commitments to anyone else? So I started this process, had no idea how I was going to go about it. But I said, you know what? I live in Colorado and we have, 53 mountains that are above 14,000 feet out here. And it's the middle of January. So it seemed like a pretty cool and cold and awful time to start this thing. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to start, going down that process. And so I put on my snowboarding gear and I went up into the mountains and I climbed my first ever 14er. It was absolutely miserable. I struggled as can be, but I made it to the summit. I did a couple more like that. Again, horrible, overweighted, wrong gear, no training, didn't know what I was doing, but I made it to the summit. And then finally I said, you know what, if I really want to make my Everest dream a reality, I got to get serious about this. And so I got into the Colorado Mountain School out here, and I started learning about rock climbing and glacier travel and wilderness survival and all the different techniques that you use when you go climb a big mountain like Everest in order to really be serious about making this reality, something that I can, come true. I went to Mount Rainier out in Washington, climbed that. I went down to Argentina and South America to climb the highest mountain in South America named Aconcagua. I went up to Alaska and climbed the highest mountain in North America named Denali or Mount McKinley. And then when I was standing on the summit of Denali at about 11:30 at night under that perpetual Alaskan summer sun all by myself with just my climbing partner, I was looking out over the beautiful Alaska range, taking in the most beautiful view imaginable. I said to myself, you know what? I can't just do this for myself. I can't just spend all this time, all this training, all this money, all this risk just to climb on Everest to fulfill that childhood promise. I had to do something bigger with it. And then that's where the idea of the quest came along, to use some of my experience at film, some of my experience in international business and travel, to try to take the rest of the world with me on this journey. Because I realized that 99.9% of this people on this planet will never have the opportunity or the desire to climb Mount Everest. So why don't I take them with me on this journey to try to fulfill this childhood promise? And that's how the quest started. And ultimately then ended up in Nepal and started going through the 63-day process of us filming over there and talking about the culture and the history and about the religion and about the significance of Mount Everest to the country of Nepal and vice versa. And then we started our 52-day trek and climb to the summit of Mount Everest. And it took 9 days to trek to Everest Base Camp, 43 days from base camp to the summit and back down. And I'm humbly honored to have been able to climb Mount Everest and come back down with all the content that I'm able to share with the world. And again, honored to have been able to share it with the students in classrooms the last 2 weeks here, the virtual reality film. And we also have that 2D film that you played the trailer to. And so, yeah, that's what the most recent films of the Quest series are. And it's an ongoing series. So we're going to take people around the world to some of these exotic, interesting places and maybe do it in 2D and VR as well, like we did with Everest, but be able to expose the world to some of these stories that they normally might not be able to experience.
Okay, very cool, Alex. Before we jump into some pictures and video clips, I see we got a great group tuning in. Don't be shy, use the chat sidebar, introduce your class, send us in any questions you have. We'll get to those shortly. For now, I'm going to share my screen. It's going to come up for you right about now. There we go. And Alex, take it away. I'll scroll through for you when you're ready.
All right, so this is me in Kathmandu, Nepal. We're at a place called Pashupatinath Temple, which is the oldest religious site and the oldest temple in Nepal. It's 3,000 years old, and it's a temple for Hindus primarily that come to worship there. One of the five major religions, as we know, the Hindu religion. And the smoke that you see in the background there is actually cremations of human bodies. So the temple is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for worshipers to come there, not only to worship, various gods, primarily the god Shiva, but also to be able to cremate their loved ones there on those stone pillars that you see in the background. And they sit there and they go to cremate their bodies, and they will then push their ashes into the river that you see in the foreground. That's the Bagmati River. And the Bagmati River is a very holy river, very sacred river for Nepalese Hindus, because it is a tributary that runs into the Ganges River, which is the most holy and sacred river for the Hindu people throughout the world. So they go there and they will cremate their loved ones and then push their ashes in the Bagmati, which ultimately flow down into the Ganges River. So we were there to film that experience, as well as what you see in the next slide. Those are called sadhus, and sadhus are holy Hindu wise men that will, essentially be equivalent to a priest in Christianity, or an imam in Islam, for example. So they are the holy Hindu wise men that are there on the temple grounds, and they live there permanently all year round. They don't have a home; they live there on the temple grounds. They've denounced all material wealth, and they've committed themselves 100% to the Hindu faith and to achieve moksha. Moksha is basically the freeing of the soul, up into the higher spirits, and that's the goal of the Hindus through the reincarnation cycle, is to ultimately achieve moksha. And the Hindu sadhus are there to help enlighten people on how to go about that. And I was interviewing them. Go on to the next slide. Now we make our way up into the Khumbu Valley, and the Khumbu Valley is where Mount Everest is situated. Matter of fact, the dead end of the Khumbu Valley, at the end of it, is where Mount Everest is, and it's nestled up on the border between Nepal and China, or Nepal and Tibet. And so, we're now up in the Khumbu Valley here, and we're going towards Everest Base Camp, that 9-day trek that it takes to get to base camp. And there are no roads in the Khumbu Valley, and there are no roads that lead to Mount Everest. So in order to get everything to Everest Base Camp, all the supplies that you need to live there for 43 days on an expedition to climb to the summit of Everest, once you've gotten there, you have to get there by one of three ways. And that is either the supplies come in by a helicopter, on the back of a human being, or on the back of an animal. In this case, that's a yak, a pretty yak that is crossing a river, the Dudkosi River in the Khumbu Valley, carrying supplies to Everest Base Camp. Next slide. And that is Namche Bazaar. Namche Bazaar is the most populated village in the Khumbu Valley and is known by the Sherpa people, the culture that is the dominant culture in the Khumbu Valley, the Sherpa people, as their capital. So Namche is the de facto capital. And as you can see by the buildings there, they are carved into the side of the mountain, almost in like a bowl shape. And so, they use terrace farming techniques, and they build their houses the same way on these terraces. And so that is one of the places that we stopped to do an acclimatization day, is in Namche Bazaar. Next slide. Now you can see the beautiful mountains that start to pop up as you go higher and higher in the Khumbu Valley. That peak is named Tamserku, or as translated in Sherpa, the 9 peaks. And you can see the 9 little peaks that make up the mountain. And you can also see the prayer flags. And now those prayer flags are Tibetan Buddhist prayer flags. Most of the Sherpa people are Buddhist, and they're Tibetan Buddhist. Now what differentiates them from traditional Buddhists is that they have kind of a hybrid mix of Bon mysticism that they brought with them from Tibet when they ended up in the Khumbu Valley, as they started to migrate into the Khumbu Valley about 650 years ago. And as you can see on those prayer flags, there's 5 different colors, and the 5 different colors represent the elements. So you've got blue, which is actually the sky. The white is air, so the actual air that is blowing the wind. The yellow is the earth, the green is the water, and the red is the fire. And on top of those flags, or within those flags, are different mantras or prayers that they put on those flags in order to have the wind spread those prayers to as many people as possible, because those prayers are being spread by the wind. Next slide. And there you can see for the first time Mount Everest in the distance there. So that is the Everest Massive. So you can see Mount Everest is the peak all the way in the back, the dark one. And then in the front of that peak is actually another part of Everest. That's the west shoulder of Mount Everest. Across the ice fall on the other side, you can see that a peak that looks to be taller than Everest, but it's not. It's just closer to us. That is Mount Nuptse. And all the way behind there, you can see this little sliver of Mount Lhotse. And so those are some of the highest mountains in the world, and that's called the Everest Massive. Those three mountains make up the Everest Massive. And down below the white, you can see the Khumbu Glacier. And the Khumbu Glacier is actually where Everest Base Camp sits upon at 17,500 feet. And it is the highest tent city in the world for a couple months of the year during the Everest climb season. And the Khumbu Glacier is also very interesting because it's the highest glacier in the world, and it also moves up to 3 to 6 feet a day. But down there is where our base camp is set up for our attempt to climb Mount Everest, which you'll see in the next slide. And there's Everest Base Camp, and that's pretty much an international tent city of people from all around the world that come usually once a year, and that is in the springtime in April and May to try to climb Mount Everest. And so that those tents are spread out over the course of about 1 mile on that Khumbu Glacier that's constantly moving 3 to 6 feet a day. So we have to adjust our tents throughout the 43 days that we were there at Everest Base Camp, while we were attempting to go up and down the mountain to adjust ourselves to the increasing altitude. And that is home for 43 days for our team right there in front of us. And the next slide. All right, and that is us during a puja ceremony. And a puja ceremony is a very important ritual that the Sherpas undergo. And what they're doing is they're asking for permission and safe travel by Choma Lungma, or Choma Mia Lungsama, which means the goddess mother of the world. And for the Sherpa people, their goddess mother of earth, or the goddess mother of the world, is actually Mount Everest. We're here in the West. When we think of the goddess mother of earth, we might think of the sky, we might think of the ground, have this kind of vague construct of what that means to us. But to the Sherpa people, it means specifically Mount Everest, because they think that is the goddess mother of the earth. And so before anybody can step foot on the mountain and try to climb the mountain, we have to ask for safe passage and permission by Choma Lungma to climb the mountain. And that's what we're doing right here, is performing the puja ceremony. Next slide. And there is the first major objective that we have to achieve to try to go up Mount Everest, and that's the Khumbu Icefall. The Khumbu Icefall is often said by a lot of people to be the deadliest 2.5 miles on Earth, because it is a bunch of huge blocks of ice and crevasses. You can see those crevasses that are, they open up and they get wider as the season expands, because it is an ice flow that moves downhill. And like I mentioned before, 3 to 6 feet a day. And therefore those cracks or crevasses will get bigger. Those blocks of ice will tumble over, and those blocks of ice are as big as cars, buildings, or even office buildings. So it's kind of like a maze of going through Jenga blocks to try to get through the Khumbu Icefall to Camp 1, and it's an ever-shifting maze of Jenga blocks. So you want to be sure to try to get through it as efficiently as possible. And every time that we went through it, we didn't go through it at the same time, because the route was shifting because of that ice constantly moving. And as you can see in the next slide, that is our team actually climbing up over some of those ice blocks. And again, you have to then be clipped into a rope. There's multiple ladders that you use in order to go up it, as well as to cross the crevasses, which you will see in the next slide. And there I am actually crossing one of those ladders. That's 2 ladders, aluminum ladders tied together by a fishing twine, essentially, that holds them together. And then you have to try to cross those rungs with your boots that are being held together by these spikes on the bottom. Those are called crampons. And those crampons are the only things that are touching those rungs on the ladders. So you have about 1 inch here in the front and an inch here in the back or less, that actually is what you're touching on that ladder as you're going across it. And so you have to be very careful on where you step in order to try to get purchase on that ladder in order to make it across that crevasse, which on to the next slide. And there I am actually crossing one of those ladders. That's 3 ladders, I think 3 or 4 ladders tied together, going across the crevasse. And as you can see, I'm placing my toes where the crampons are on the rungs of the ladder in order to make it across that ladder. So yeah, you have to be very precise, and it's not for the faint of heart. On to the next slide. And there is one of my teammates, Golner Tombat from Turkey. We're climbing now one of those crevasse walls. So that was about a 65-foot tall crevasse wall, and we have to shimmy up that and actually climb up down into it and then up it to get to the other side as we work our way into the next major part of the mountain, which is called the Western Cwm, or known as the Silent Valley in English when it was first named that, and as we make our way towards the back of the valley towards Everest. And here's our next slide. And that is now the Lhotse Face. And the Lhotse Face is at the back of that Western Cwm Valley. And it's a 5,000-foot wall of ice that separates Camp 2 and Camp 4. And in between Camp 2 and Camp 4, of course, is Camp 3. So you work your way up from Camp 2, you stop at Camp 3, which is about 23,500 feet. The first time that we go to Camp 3, we go up there just to acclimatize, and then we go all the way back down to base camp, and we try to set ourselves up and position ourselves for the summit push when the weather is right. And then we go back up through the icefall, past Camp 1, Camp 2, and again Camp 3 up on the Lhotse Face to try to make it up to Camp 4, which is the highest camp in the world at 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters. And that's where we will stage from to try to make our summit attempt. And that leads us to the next slide. And there's Camp 4. So as you can see there, we are sitting there on a ledge in between the highest mountain in the world. That's Mount Everest that you see right there. And that you can see, that's the place that we have to head to get to the summit. And to our right, what you don't see is the 4th highest mountain, which is connected there by that col in that little gully in between Everest and Mount Lhotse. And Mount Lhotse is just under 28,000 feet. And that is to our right in that picture. But what we do then is we leave Camp 4 and we leave late at night usually in order to try to get to the summit and back down to those tents. And the next slide, you can see me actually leaving, and that's about midnight. So we leave our tents at Camp 4 around midnight or so in order to try to make it to the summit and back down to the tents before it is dark on the next day, because you don't want to be caught out coming down from the summit of Everest in the dark. That's a very dangerous situation. So, but you have to leave in the dark in order to get to the summit in time in late morning or early afternoon to try to get back down. And on to the next slide. And there you can see me climbing one of these rock slabs on the southeast ridge of Everest, which is actually the international border between China and Nepal. And that is about 28,300 feet right there. And I'm using this thing called an ascender or a Jumar. And that is connected into that rope. And what that does is allows me to push up on the rope and then grab it in order to help pull myself up. But it also acts as a safety device because it has teeth on it, which are clipped in here like this. And then that's what latches me to the rope. And then I can push up, it locks, push up, and it locks. And that's, kind of serves two purposes, like I said, as a safety device, but also to help me use my upper body strength to try to work my way up the mountain on some of those difficult parts like that. And on to the next slide. And that is now the summit slope. We're now getting above the Hillary Step, the famous Hillary Step, and now we're starting to head towards the summit. And you can see all the way down there in the distance, you see a little blue lake, and you can see the bottom of that white glacier, which is the Khumbu Glacier. Well, that's where base camp is, and that's where we started many, many, many days and weeks before in order to get to this point where I took this photo looking back down in that direction. And on to the next slide. And there I am on the summit of Mount Everest doing a selfie. And as you can see in the background, you can see the curvature of the Earth, which is really, really cool. I am standing there at 29,032 feet, or 8,849 meters. And I was fortunate and humbly honored to have been up on the summit for 45 minutes by myself with only one other person, my good dear friend Tashi Sherpa. So we had the summit all to ourselves. And on to the next slide. And there it is. That's the summit of Mount Everest without anybody in it. And again, like I said, it was just me and Tashi up there for about 45 minutes before the rest of our team came up and were able to make it to the summit as well, or most of our team was able to make it to our summit as well. And that summit platform that you see right there is about the size of 2 ping pong tables. So it's not very big, but that's what the summit of Mount Everest looks like. And that's what you can see from the summit of Mount Everest. You can look for about 200 miles as far as the eye can see into India, 200 miles into Nepal, and 200 miles into China or Tibet. And you can see some of the other 8,000-meter peaks. There's 14 of them in the world. You can see about 4 of them from the summit of Everest as well. So it's amazing that you can see some of those other peaks off in the distance. But that is the summit of Mount Everest right there.
All right, let's come back from that screen share. Alex, what an incredible journey. And, not to mention you had camera gear along with you as well, so you could document it. Our classrooms got to benefit from that, which was pretty cool. And now I think we should get ready to turn things over to Q&A action.
Absolutely.
So before we do that, or as we're getting ready to do that, I'm going to share my screen because while Alex was presenting, I pulled together a Kahoot quiz behind the scenes. So we're going to have a little Kahoot together, see how we do, and then we'll have questions as it's loading and questions afterwards as well. So you should see this come up on our screen now. There we go. Kahoot.it is the website that you're going to want to go to. So there we go, Kahoot.it. Then you're going to want to put a PIN number in. Today's PIN is 642-9945. If you have tablets or Chromebooks handy, use those. If not, a tablet or a phone and scan that QR code. If you can't join with tech, don't worry about it at all. You can still play along and see how you do. So while we're waiting to our classrooms tuning in via YouTube, don't be shy. Let's get some questions into the chat sidebar. We've got Miss N's grade 1 and 2s hiding backstage. If you have some questions, let me know in the private chat and I can pop you guys in to ask a couple questions. We'll start with one from YouTube. Caesar is joining us all the way from Nicaragua. And Caesar is wondering about your favorite part on the mountain and maybe your least favorite part.
Ooh, that's a great question. I have to say my favorite part is probably the summit because of the experience of not only being up there, and that was kind of symbolic in achieving my childhood promise to myself. Matter of fact, I was up there and I broke out in tears, and you see it in the 97-minute documentary. But I also paid my respects to Chomolungma, like we mentioned, the goddess mother of the world, or goddess mother of the earth, for allowing me to safe passage to her summit and to be able to stand up there for 45 minutes with my good friend Tashi Sherpa. So that was a moment that will always be kind of an anniversary for me, and something that will always be ingrained in my memory as far as I'll be able to remember throughout my life. And so I would probably have to say that the summit was my favorite. And of course, it was the most beautiful view I've ever taken into these eyeballs. My least favorite part of the mountain, probably the least favorite part of the mountain is not really the part of the mountain itself. It's probably the fact that you have to go down the mountain. And the reason I say that is you don't climb Mount Everest, and I mentioned it earlier, you kind of alluded to it. You don't climb it in one sitting. The reason why it takes 43 days to climb Everest from Mount Everest base camp to the summit and back is because you have to let your body acclimatize, meaning you have to have your body produce more red blood cells so it can carry more oxygen in order to survive at that increasingly thinning air and high altitude. So we go up the mountain the first time to Camp 1 and the Camp 2, and then we come all the way back down. Then we go back up the mountain to Camp 1, Camp 2, and then Camp 3 on the side of the Lhotse face, like I mentioned, at 23,500 feet. And we don't go any higher than that to acclimatize, because at above 23,500 feet or so, your body can no longer acclimatize or produce any more red blood cells. And then we come all the way back down to base camp and then we wait for the weather window, to allow us for a chance to get to the summit. Well, the coming down part I really didn't like. It's one of my pet peeves when I climb a mountain. I hate losing altitude when I work so hard to gain it, and to have to do that multiple times, to go up and then come all the way back down to go right back up was probably my least favorite part.
All right. Miss N's class, I am going to pop you in. If you want to unmute your mic, it looks like Chase and Keaton both have questions. If you want to let them ask those questions, yeah, we'd love to hear them.
All right. All right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we gotcha.
All right, we're back. So one student asked, how much snow do you think was on the mountain? Chasing Grid 2 wants to know if you had to give a little rough estimate. And the other student wants to know again, how high is Mount Everest again?
Two very good questions. And the first one, I have no idea. But what I do know, it snows a lot, meaning it's seasonal. So every year is a little bit different. And Everest is also interesting because it is so tall, which I'll get to the second question now, which is it is 29,032 feet high, or 8,849 meters tall. And because it is so big, it also generates its own weather. So besides the weather that actually is in the area, Everest is so big that it actually stands up into the jet stream and is able to generate its own weather. So what that means from a snow standpoint, it can create its own snowstorms at any given time. So the weather will fluctuate in a matter of seconds to minutes, from being sunny and clear to being windy and snowy, and adding to that total snow count on the mountain itself. So yeah, it's a lot of snow. But the thing is, depending on the side of the mountain, though, I'll give you a more specific answer. On the Nepal side that I went up is a lot snowier than it is on the Tibet side or the Chinese side. The north side of the mountain in China gets very little snow because the southern side of the mountain, it stops a lot of that wind and a lot of that weather that comes and hits Everest, and it deposits on that side of the mountain, and then it doesn't land on the other side of the mountain. So traditionally, the southern side of the mountain is a lot snowier than the northern side of the mountain. And also the east side, the back side of the mountain, the Kangshung Face as it's called, is a just all snow. You don't even see any rocks when you look down into the Kangshung Face from the ridge of Everest, and you can look down into it, and it's just snow all the way down into the Rongbuk Glacier, that sits down 17,000 feet below, so about 12,000 feet below from the summit. So yeah, it's a very, very snowy place at times, but the total amount of snow, I do not know.
All right. Well, let's get into this Kahoot action. We've got some students, some classrooms in here with us. So let's get it going. There's some true or false, some multiple choice. The quicker you put that right answer in, the more points you're going to get. Here we go. So starting off with the multiple choice, how tall is Everest? Convenient. We just covered that. Is it 2,354 meters? Is it 5,000 meters? Is it 8,849 meters? Or is it 1,000 meters? So we've got some options there for the height of Everest. You've got about 16 seconds to lock your answer in. Is it 2,354 meters, 5,000 meters, 8,849 meters, or 1,000 meters high? Here we go. Counter's over. All right. So good job to the students who picked 8,849 meters. There are 14 summits around the world that pass the 8,000 meter mark. Of course, Everest is one of those, and it's the biggest. All right, Magic Elephant holding down that top spot. We go to our next question. This is a multi-select. That means you need to click as many that you think are right. So Alex mentioned climbing some mountains. Which ones should you select? Everest, Aconcagua, Denali, or Mount Vinson? So he mentioned a few. You need to click every single one that you think that Alex has climbed. There's one here. I'll just give you a clue now that we're down to 10 seconds. There's one here that doesn't belong. So you need to pick the three that Alex has climbed. Got about 2 more seconds. There we go. There we go. So Mount Vinson is the one that didn't belong on that list. Mount Vinson is the tallest mountain in Antarctica. And that puts the Dazzle Deer into that top spot. We've got some true or false coming your way to end things off. Two true and false questions. The best way to get to Everest Base Camp is to take the road. What do you think when Alex talked about getting to Everest Base Camp? Is the best way to get there to take the road? Got about 6 seconds to get something in. All right, a little bit of a split, but that is false. There are no roads that go to Everest Base Camp. You have to hike your way in, and then you need big, strong animals like those yaks to be able to get all your gear that distance to Everest Base Camp. The Daring Tiger slides into first spot. And our last one, green prayer flags represent water. Is that true or is that false? We know there's 5 colors. We know they represent 5 elements. Are the green ones representing water? True or false? A few more seconds. All right, there we go. That is true. True that the green represents water. And Alex, what's the reason? Why green?
Yeah, that's a good question. You would think maybe Earth, but the reason why green is because of the mineral content in the glacial water, up in the high mountains. And so for them, the water, and you can see it actually in the slide that you showed there, or the slide that I showed earlier as well, it actually looks greenish. It doesn't look blue. So yeah, so their concept and their idea of what water looks like when those prayer flags were initiated was green. Yeah.
All right, very cool. Okay. That is it for the Kahoot. Let's look at our podium. Third place, we've got the Magic Elephant. In that second spot, the Lucky Rabbit. And holding down the top of the podium today, the Daring Tiger, holding on for the last 2 questions. All right. Let's stop that screen share. There we go. Let's close down that music and let's wrap up with some more questions. So again, don't be shy. Use the chat sidebar. Send us in some questions, and we'll go from there. And Alex, this is perfect because you've got some stuff to help us with this. I have a classroom asking about how much gear you had to take, how much equipment.
Oh, quite a bit. So I had climbing gear, of course. For example, I think that this is probably the most important piece of gear in order to make it to the summit of Everest is these little spikes known as crampons. These go on the bottom of my expedition boots, and these are the actual boots that I wore on Everest, because these spikes are the only thing that keeps you staying onto the mountain, because it's all snow, rock, and ice. And so these are very important. Without these spikes, you're not going to make it to the summit of Everest. And these are my expedition boots. I had quite a bit of gear as well. I had, like the safety equipment, the Jumar that I use to go up and down the rope. That's very important. Of course, in order to use that Jumar, or the Ascender as it's called also, you need a harness. And that harness gives you then the loops, the roping that the actual Jumar or Ascender is connected to, as well as a few other things, some carabiners for safety clipping and so on. You need that. This down suit back here is very vital as you get higher in the altitudes, because Everest can be extremely cold. It can get 40, 50, 30 below zero. And so this suit is rated to a negative 40 below zero. It's almost like a walking sleeping bag. So you can see how puffy it is. You stick your body in there, and as on the higher parts of the mountains, this is what you're wearing. And especially on the summit day, which you saw in the footage. Satellite transponder. So this is a satellite transponder that's very important, because you can be tracked to where you are for safety reasons, but also this is how I was able to communicate to people back home, because there are no cell phone towers on Everest. So I would send people with little texts here saying, oh, I'm at Camp 2, we're melting some ice to make some water, or tell them about whatever else was going around. So this was an important piece of equipment. Another piece of equipment that we use that's not as important these days as it was when Everest was first started being climbed, but that's an ice axe. And so the ice axe has kind of 2 purposes. You can use it as a cane style, where you jab into the snow with a point to get purchase, or you can chop into the ice this way and pull yourself up, which has been largely replaced by this Jumar device, because there's now fixed ropes from base camp all the way up to the summit. And also, if you happen to fall, you can use this point right here to try to stop you from sliding down the hill. And this side, you can also use to hack ice in order to make ice blocks or to carve out snow in order to melt snow to make water and those kind of things. But you then have a backpack and you have different layers as well. So for depending on where on the mountain, you have to wear different equipment because it can get very hot when the sun is out and the air is still because it's so high up in the reflective snow that sometimes the temperatures will actually be around 100 degrees when it's completely still. But as soon as it gets windy or as soon as it gets cloudy or you get a little bit higher on the mountain, it can go all the way down into the negative 20, 30, and 40 degrees. So you have to have different amounts of clothing. And so, of course, so you have different gloves and shoes and socks and so on. So quite a bit of the climbing gear and then also camera gear. So I was also part of the filming process. So I had to carry a lot of gear in my backpack, camera batteries, cameras themselves, and things like that. So solar panels to charge them and everything, because again, there's no place to plug it into. So you have to generate solar power in order to charge those batteries. So we carried quite a bit of gear up the mountain.
All right. We've got Miss Sampson's crew. They are, I believe, in the Northwest Territories. And they want to know about your prep for breathing in the high altitudes.
Yeah, there's a couple things. First and foremost, you have to go to altitude to really understand how your body reacts to altitude. So, that's why it takes years and years and years of training and practice to go before you go attempt Mount Everest. And so each time I would go like into Argentina and climb the highest mountain in South America, I would get up to 22,000, feet and see how I felt there, or up in Alaska at Denali, to get up there to see what it felt like. And so you kind of get an idea of how your body reacts and then how you're going to breathe, so that you can have different techniques on how you try to almost somewhat hyperventilate, but how you also rest in your breathing so you're efficient step after step, hour after hour. So that's very important. But ultimately, you don't know how your body is going to react until you get to those high altitudes, because it's genetic. You're either born with the ability to acclimatize or not. So I like to make a little bit of joke. Make sure to choose your parents wisely before you decide to go to Mount Everest.
All right. Miss Cork's crew, they are wondering about the length of time you trained, thinking about the physical and the technical training.
Yeah, absolutely. So it took me years and years and years before I decided to go to Everest, and that was a lot of climbing, a lot of mountaineering, schooling, and classes. But the actual training where I specifically set it aside for Mount Everest was 1 year. So for 1 year before I jumped onto an airplane to fly from Colorado all the way to Kathmandu, Nepal, I spent 7 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day training. And I had a very regimented routine where every Monday I did the same thing, every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then repeated it again for a whole calendar year. So extensive amount of training. Needless to say, I was in the best shape of my life physically when I went to Everest, even better than when I played college soccer. And I was a college soccer athlete, and I was even better shape when I went to Mount Everest than when I played highly competitive soccer.
Yeah, and that's pretty important. This morning you talked about, the toll it took on your body.
Yeah, absolutely. Mount Everest, no matter what, it will take a toll on you, because no human civilization has ever lived above 17,000 feet. We're not meant to survive there. We can't stay there indefinitely. So if you try to stay there indefinitely, you ultimately will die, because essentially what happens is your cells are beginning to deteriorate and die, and ultimately you will die. So what happens, the body is very stressed out, and your body, as you go higher and higher, starts to slowly deteriorate and slowly dies. And so your body goes to almost into shock to try to protect its main organs, the heart and the brain primarily, and of course the function of the lungs to be able to breathe. So what that does is it starts to eat away, some of your skin cells, some of your muscles fibers, as well as a lot of fat, and you're also burning a lot of calories. So on a given day on Everest, I would burn between 8 to 20,000 calories. Well, you can't put that much food in your stomach on a daily basis, and your digestive system starts to shut down, and your taste bud receptors start to shut down. So nothing tastes good. You don't even want to eat. You have no desire to eat, but you're forcing yourself to eat. And then you can't digest a lot of that food that you're eating anyway. So I lost a total of 27 pounds. So I left Denver, Colorado at 197 pounds. I got back to Kathmandu after a 52-day expedition at 170 pounds. So yeah, you will lose a lot of weight. It just depends on how much you lose. And that comes down to the person themselves.
Okay, we've got one more question here for you, Alex. We saw the yak This student's wondering, any more wildlife along the journey?
Yeah, so you have donkeys as well, and then you also have a hybrid animal called a doppio. And what that is, that's a mix between a cow and a yak, and they were bred in order to make a doppio. And it's great. They're a great animal for high altitude work because they have kind of the strength and durability of the cow, but they have the ability to survive at high altitude like the yak do. So depending on where you are in the trek towards Everest Base Camp, because that took 9 days, as we mentioned before, the higher you go, the less donkeys you see because they're not good at altitude. That then you see more of the doppio. And then as you get closer and closer to the base camp, the dominant animal is the yak because of the absolute best at 17,500 feet, which is where Everest Base Camp sits. You also saw birds, gorax, which was one of the most amazing things that I saw. You see gorax, which are the like ravens, and they were living at Everest Base Camp, and the village closest to Everest Base Camp is called Gorak Shep, and so it's basically the home of the gorax is what it translates to. And these birds are amazing because what the Sherpa people would do is the cooks, when they would make the food for their staff and for the climbers and stuff, the leftover foods they would set out on tarps and put behind the tents, and the gorax would eat off of that. And so we'd see a lot of gorax at Everest Base Camp. But what's more impressive is I actually saw gorax at South Col, or Camp 4 as it's known, at 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters. They flew all the way up there. And it's because, again, they are picking away at some of the leftover snacks that us humans leave there.
All right. Well, I want to start off with a shout out to our classrooms. Thank you so much to our crew today. Thank you for those amazing questions. Thanks for sending in, playing Kahoot with us as well. And Alex, another huge shout out to you. Well, obviously the whole team as well who helped you make it possible. But thanks for being with us today and following up after we gave students a chance to check out the Quest Everest.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for having me. It was a complete honor to be able to not only share, my experience with all the students in classrooms here today, but also to be able to share the Quest Everest VR experience with them so they could actually see what it's like to climb Mount Everest with me in first person all the way to the summit and back. And if you want to watch the 97-minute 2D documentary on your normal TV, you can also see that as well if you're interested on all your major providers like Amazon and Apple and so on.
All right, perfect. Well, again, Alex, thanks so much. Students, have a great rest of the week. Hopefully we see you in some more events, and we're going to sign off for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.